It's the Church of Jesus Christ.
There is a poverty of truth, and there's a poverty of truth whenever you take God out of the equation. The whole TikTok generation, the social media generation, it's just indicative of the times in which we live.
The Bible tells us lying lips are an abomination to the Lord, but they that deal truly are His delight. But screeching voices from the left tell us you can choose your gender identity and lie to children by saying boys can be girls and girls can be boys.
There's confusion when you neglect God. Then there's no longer any standard for truth, and then people are whimsical about whatever their idea of truth is.
How did we go from 30 years ago, LGBTQ represented 2% of our world, to it's now 30 to 40% of Gen Z, that's 18 to 24-year-olds?
The National Institutes of Health reports that in countries like Sweden, there has been a massive 1,000% increase of gender dysphoria cases from 2005 to 2018. And right here at home, the percentage of people with so-called gender dysphoria has tripled in 4 years. The vast majority are young people under the age of 25, before their brains are fully developed. Author and speaker Rosaria Butterfield addresses the normalization of transgenderism in her latest book, 5 Lies of Our Anti-Christian Age.
Does a gender-anxious child exist? Yes, very much like an anorexic child may exist. That's different than what these people are talking about. My husband, Kent Butterfield, has preached 3 sermons on the sin of transgenderism, and in one of them he said, it's like Dr. Frankenstein met Dr. Mangala and they decided to go into practice together. You know, and we had a young man in our church who came to me afterwards with tears in his eyes and said, you know, when I was 12, I started to go down that track, and I wish I had heard a sermon like that when I was 12, because I'd have a slightly different history now.
In his Daily Wire podcast, clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson speaks with whistleblower Dr. Ethan Haim about some of the practices of Texas Children's Hospital's so-called gender-affirming care.
I've never seen the medical and psychiatric community do anything worse in my entire life than what's been happening with so-called gender-affirming care.
So it's anti-language, right? It's not just a euphemism. It's not just a few It's not a few degrees off from the truth. It's not oriented towards the truth. It's oriented towards the exact opposite.
Completely. It's diametrically opposed to reality and to the truth. The biggest lie in all of this was, well, would you rather have a live trans child or a dead child? Right? This insistence that to parents that if they dared voice opposition to this absolutely barbaric and unconscionable medical process, that they were basically dooming their children to death.
It's the most evil lie told in the history of medicine.
Since this interview aired, Dr. Haim was facing federal charges for leaking patient information as he blew the whistle on harm being done to minors and their families. But all the charges were dropped in January of 2025.
Somebody once told me that the greatest way I can show you respect is to tell you the truth. When we speak the truth, it can come across as lacking compassion, and here's why. Because truth by itself can be offensive. You know, when you tell someone the truth and they don't like it, they can accuse you of not being compassionate. But to be compassionate is actually to tell someone the truth because you love them enough to be truthful. We can speak the truth in love, but to not speak the truth, that is showing a lack of compassion. And the church should really be the solution to the confusion and stand up and say, here's how God designed us in the beautiful way that He designed us. Let's protect that, embrace that, and help people who are confused to understand their God-given beauty the way He created them.
Designed to create equal opportunities for women in education and athletics, the federal law known as Title IX, created 50 years ago, gives equal opportunity to females across the nation. But days before leaving office, the Biden administration tried to redefine the word sex by inserting the term gender identity next to it. undermining the original intention of Title IX for fairness for women and girls in sports and education. But in 2025, President Trump issued an executive order establishing that biological sex will be the only criteria for determining male and female. As Alliance Defending Freedom's CEO and president, Kristen Wagoner, said, this is a colossal win for women and girls across the country. No longer will men or boys be permitted to compete against women, nor will males be permitted in female spaces.
Transgenderism is self-abuse. You're destroying who you are.
One of Walt Heyer's most trusted family members opened the door to cross-dressing, causing his life to take a drastic turn.
It started in 1944 when my grandmother made me a purple chiffon dress and began to dress me up and told me how cute I was. And she said, this is our little secret. And as soon as my father found out about our little secret, which had gone on for 2.5 years, it scared him. And so he started disciplining me heavily as a way to try to shape me into a man. Obviously, that's just additional abuse. You're just putting abuse on top of abuse. And so then his adopted brother, who was my Uncle Fred, in his teens, began to sexually molest me because of the purple dress.
As an adult, Walt Heyer underwent gender transition surgery and lived as Laura Jensen for 8 years. As a result, he lost his family, his job, and became homeless until he embraced God's truth about his true identity. He founded SexChangeRegret.com and has written 10 books, his most recent, Embracing God's Design.
We don't know about consequences until we develop a full brain, and her cross-dressing me and telling me how cute I look destroyed the image I had of who I was. And so I struggled with that identity.
Mother of twin boys, Angel Bryan, discovered a shocking revelation about one of her adult sons.
I found prescription bottles for one of my sons and estrogen on the bottle, and my heart just sunk. And then to approach my husband to let him know what I had found, and together us being in that same spot of just, what on earth, this is our child, and he was raised in the church. How could he not know that he was loved, and how could he not know that he was perfect in God's image?
4 years have already passed since then, but Angel and her husband have promised themselves they would never lie to their son about his true identity, regardless of the social pressures and the pronouns their son prefers. In the trans movement, a lot of times they tell you, you need to respect my pronouns and you need to call me a certain way. What was the demand, and how did you respond, if it's any different than you are responding now?
I told him if he was okay with not being a pronoun, it would be great for me to just call him my child and love him as my child, as I always have. And when we got to that discussion, he agreed that he was absolutely not a pronoun.
When we try to embrace the craziness of the culture for the sake of just being loving, that's not loving at all. The real loving thing is to give people the truth. We can give the truth in a loving way, but truth by itself is the most important thing that will set people free.
My prayers have changed drastically. So when all this first started, boy, I thought I had to help God fix this. So I was like, God, you got to do this now. You got to do this before the drugs can harm him. You gotta do it now, do it now. Once I surrendered, really handing it over to God, is that now my prayers have changed to the space where I go, God, just bring him home to you. Bring him home to the family. And that's how my prayers have changed.
God has entrusted children to our care, and if we are blessed to be able to have children, we have to remember they're not really ours, they're the Lord's.